OMG, baby, tell him.
Zoom settings. Hey there, welcome to Powered by Backers. It is Justin Fox. I am here joined by Cathleen Fillmore. We are live. Well, actually, this is a recording, but Cathleen, thank you very much for joining me here on Powered by Backers.
My pleasure.
Awesome. So quick little bio. So Cathleen, you are the owner of Speakers Gold Bureau, and you're a marketing consultant to professional speakers. We'll talk a little bit. You obviously wanted to get into talking a little bit about that. So why don't we take a step back before we get into that? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your sort of background and what got you into this sort of the speaking side of things? I know you've been a part of, I guess, so York University. There, you went to Acadia. You've worked at a couple of different places. American Chamber of Commerce, amongst others. So tell us a little bit about your, I guess, experience and what brought you to the speakers world, I guess, if you will.
Total accident, really. I was teaching English as a single, as a second language and working with refugees, which I loved the work, but I hated the bureaucracy. I am so unemployable. I do not like people telling me what to do because they're never right and I am. And so
that sounds like me. No, just kidding. Sounds like a lot of people.
Right, I know. Yeah. Well, entrepreneurs. Yes,
right, exactly.
Yeah. And so we want to chart our own path. And so my friend was dating someone whose niece had started a speakers bureau called Speaker Spotlight. And so I interviewed her because I thought, wow, you know, I teach, I get paid a little bit of money and I have to do new material all the time. But my friend's friend, he was out there speaking and making some money and he got to repeat his material. So I thought that was very interesting.
Right, because you can say you have a new audience every time, right? So you get to say the same 20 minutes spiel every day, right? Versus, you know, a whole series of speak talks, you know, to the same class, right? Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd also done some writing for magazines. And of course, you know, in the late 80s, the magazine market was kind of falling apart. And so I thought, well, writing's what I do. So I'm pretty messed up if I can't get my voice out there. But then I realized another way to do it. So a couple of years later, I moved to Halifax. I sold my house, left my young sons in their early 20s and moved to Halifax, and I went to write a book that I had in my head for a long time. And I thought, I'll give myself a year and see if I can do this. Because book sales were still okay then. So I had a year to live on in Nova Scotia, which was a little less expensive than living in Toronto.
Right.
And then I just met someone and I said, you know, I went to a couple of speaking meetings in Toronto and they were kind of fun and it would be good to have that in Toronto and Halifax.
Yeah.
And so we got CAPS Atlantic started because CAPS was not even the national then. So I really was, I am a pioneer in the speaking industry in Canada, no question.
And CAPS stands for the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, just for those who are unaware. So it was sort of early days of CAPS.
Wasn't even national. And, you know, Canada was behind the US. They already had a very well-established system going, but we were just getting started. And we actually were originally part of the NSA in the US. But then we said, I don't think so. We want to be our own. And so we split off into CAPS. Yeah. And then I had to be president because there was no one else. Like I'd been to 2.5 meetings of speakers here in Toronto, and suddenly I'm president and I know nothing. And I'm not even a speaker.
Right.
So it was so much fun and so stressful. And I never took on a leadership role after that. I thought it was just so thankless. You know, people think you're doing it for glory. It was not that. It was sacrifice. but I learned such a ton of information. And
Right.
so then I got into that field, and I realized the book I'd gone to write wasn't the book it wasn't a good time for me to write it. Yeah.
Right.
So I wrote a book on speaking, and I wrote a book on a loyalist in Nova Scotia. I wrote 2 books before I came back 3 years later. And I started consulting with speakers and saying, well, no, there's a bureau over here you need to know about. No, let me connect you with this person. And so then I began to earn money doing that, because I quickly realized, after doing a couple of paid speaking engagements in Nova Scotia, I'm really not interested in being on the platform so much.
Right.
Yeah. No, I'm really happier behind the scenes and working with speakers than I am being upfront. I'm kind of an introvert, so.
Okay. So that's an interesting world. I'm going to be very blunt. I know nothing about. And I'm sure you get this a lot. It seems like people talk about it. Like, I've heard people, there's obviously speaker series, or I've seen people do keynote speaking. So I assume there's a market for what. Like, tell us a little bit about what is the, like, if I'm, who hires speakers? Is it I'm hosting an event, I want a keynote, or I'm at a university or college, and I want somebody to do our what do you call it, like graduation speech, or kind of those types of things. Like, how does it all work, or what's the market? I mean, tell me a little bit about that, like, because it's kind of, I consider myself, I've seen and heard a lot of things, but it's sort of outside of my realm of understanding. I'd love to hear, and I'm sure it is for many people watching right now, that would say, tell me more about, how do I become a speaker, right? Like, what does that process look like?
Okay, so first of all, I'll be blunt too, and
Yes.
actually you'd make a great speaker. You've got the voice, and that's kind of important. If you don't have the voice, you've got to get some training so that you really access your true voice.
Okay.
Joe Biden, he's not accessing his full voice, and I could just scream when I hear him, because he's just talking kind of raspy. He's got a deeper voice. If he's not using it, it will hurt him. So you need the voice.
Right.
You need a value proposition.
Okay, so some sort of experience that you've done
to say. Well, you need something to say that's going to benefit the particular organization you speak to. If you don't have that,
right,
get off. Like, go home.
Yeah, of course. So you need to be able to talk about your experiences, or your education, or some topic that you've done some sort of research into. Or, I mean, I've watched TEDx. I keep kind of coming back to TEDx, and watching some of their talks. I assume it's more than that, though, right?
It's more than that. And I'll tell you where the audience is. Government can be the audience, not always the highest paid, for sure, but still a steady market. Associations are another market, again, tend to be usually at the low end, but there are hundreds and hundreds of associations. Not all of them pay,
Okay.
But for bug removal or something like that, pest removal, they're probably not going to pay you. But there are bigger associations like social workers, teachers, nurses, accountants, financial planners, that kind of thing. They do pay. And then there's the corporate market as well, and there's a small business market, which is a little harder to find. Corporate market is easier to find, but the highest paid, and it's the hardest to get into. You need a strong value proposition. So, like, I have a lot to say. I could tell you stories all day long.
Right.
But if you're not benefiting from them, then it's just.
So there needs to be sort of like a meaning behind it, right? You need to be,
if you're going to get paid for it,
or sort of what are people looking for? Let me, I guess, ask that question. I would think inspirational, or sort of like, I've been there, failed, gone through the ringer, sort of came out on the other side smelling like roses. I don't know. That's sort of to sum it up, but is like, what types of people are they looking for, say, in the corporate world? Like, what are they What are they looking for?
Well, you wouldn't believe the variation, but I've got a speaker who talks about cybersecurity, and he has some hair-raising stories because he's the best in that industry, in my view.
Right.
He has hair-raising stories to tell about it, but he also has been hired by the top accounting firms to manage their security, so he knows
Okay.
what he's speaking about. So it has to
So
provide
it's-
value if you're getting paid. Otherwise, you're just kind of indulging yourself, and maybe people feel good, but they're not going to pay you a lot of money for that. If you
Right.
can improve their situation, if you can tell them in today's world how to better manage their security systems and not get hacked, then that's pretty good.
So
I've
it's
got
more of
other
an expertise type of thing, you're saying,
can be
right?
that
Yeah.
that's certainly hot. And then the other thing is when you can get people on board with employee engagement and that kind of thing, which is a different kind of expertise.
Right.
Easier to come by. So in that sense, not quite so well paid, but still reasonably well paid. And if that's what you love, that's what you should do. You have to follow your heart in this. Don't fake it, and don't go try and pitch a program that your heart's really not in, because we will know it's a very sophisticated audience these days.
Right. So I would think sales, I'm just sort of looking back on my career, like sales, business development. I remember we'd have people come in at times when I worked sort of in the corporate world. They'd come in and talk about maybe a new sales strategy or technique or whatever that they had, sort of the flavor of the month that they had come up with, and sort of teach on that topic. So is that kind of the same concept there, I guess?
Yep. Sales is not always so well paid because there's so many people who are in sales who get an added benefit from speaking to an audience, because chances are they'll get work from consulting work or training work, so it's not quite as well paid. But that's certainly another field as well.
Avenue.
And then I've got a couple of people in the trust and negotiation field, and actually they're really doing well, because today we need to know, in such an uncertain world, how do you become seen as a trustworthy organization? Not necessarily be a trustworthy one, but how are you perceived in the market as that, right?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so let's sort of look at like the actual tactical. So let's say me. I'm me. I've got an interesting story, some experience in XYZ fields, entrepreneurship, sales, business development, whatever it is. What would be the sort of steps? Like obviously, Speakers Gold, the Bureau. What could you help us or help someone like myself accomplish, or where do I start as a aspiring speaker, if you will? What's sort of that process, or how does that look for someone like myself who's never done it before?
Well, I'm not sure that I would work with someone who's only beginning and has.
I thought you said I had a really good voice. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you do.
I'm joking. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I tend to work more with high-end speakers, but I work with speakers who really draw me in, and so occasionally I'll make an exception. But what I would say to you first is, if you're not going to survive this phone call, if there's a big, tornado behind you, but I'm perfectly safe, like, what would your message be to the world? And I like to get that core message. And honestly, I asked one guy that because he was just so headspace, and you can't be headspace if you're in marketing. You can't. You're not going to engage people. You've got to engage the heart before we give you access to our brains. Period.
Yeah. And that's an amazing question. If you were in a tornado and you're about to, I guess, perish, and you're on the other side, what would my last words be to you?
Or not to me necessarily, for me to pass on
to the world, right?
For me to pass on to the people you love, right?
Or to, yeah, exactly.
So what would that be?
Mine would probably just be, I love you. Thanks for the good times.
Yeah, of course. Like, it's that simple, but then you know where you stand at your core. And once you know that, then you can build it up. So it's really powerful, right? So the whole power of treating everyone well, the whole power of accepting people exactly as they are. So you could speak on diversity. Okay.
Did I just reveal something about myself with my response? I feel like I should have said something more profound or
No, you were
or
honest. That was, what's more profound than that? You were honest. So I had one guy and I asked him and he said, well, I think everyone needs to deliver good customer service. And I said, I gave him 3 minutes to live. And I said, what's your message? And he said something about customer service. And I said, you don't give a damn about customer service right now.
right. That's
So
not
now
what
you've
you're
got
gonna
2
say.
minutes.
That's not what you're gonna say. I can tell
It's
you.
not what you're going to say.
Yeah, I've been there, and that's not what you say.
No, so you need to know who you are at your core before you can really build an authentic message.
Right.
And then you build it from there. And then I say, okay, now what value is that providing to the audience?
Right.
You need a platform in a sense. So you need a value proposition, why you're qualified,
Right.
5 benefits that your speech will provide to the audience, organizations you've spoken to before, and what they've had to say about you, right? Because no point listing 10 organizations if they all said, well, that sucked,
That
right?
guy was an idiot. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you need the testimonials as well. And when you have that, you're in business. But honestly, when I hear a really powerful value proposition, like I'm in, someone says to me, I'm in risk management, and someone did say to me, and I saw I was an ordinary seaman, and I saw the Air India crash
Okay.
go down, and he said, and then I had to testify in court, and now I'm in the safety and risk management field. Now there's a value proposition.
Right.
For a lot of organizations, not only the clear ones who have safety issues like electrical and things like that, and trains and planes and boats, but all sorts of other organizations, insurance and so on, right?
So it's sort of like a lived experience, right? Expertise along with sort of lived experience, or some combination of the two.
Or researched.
Or researched experience, right? Exactly. So I feel like though one of the things you said, it kind of is like a chicken and egg thing, because from what you mentioned, if there isn't that huge lived experience, which obviously gives you maybe that foot in the door, and then maybe that's, I guess I'm probably answering my own question. I was going to say, because then the value proposition, if I haven't had the opportunity to speak to people, I might not be given that opportunity. So it's sort of like do you start small? Are there people, I guess, that would be more open to somebody who doesn't have the experience to kind of give them a shot? Or like, what's that, how do you build your platform? I guess it's a question for everybody, every entrepreneur, every business, any venture. You have to get started somewhere, I guess. So maybe what would be that? I'm kind of answering my own question as I'm asking it, but what would be sort of that starting point for, say, an aspiring speaker?
Well, for me, in the few months that I was out there speaking, I listed the Ontario ESL national conference because they asked me to speak about cartoons in the workplace. So that was legit. And then I spoke at my church group, so I put them down. I mean, like, desperation is desperation, right?
Right.
So we've spoken to groups. When you think about it, we've all spoken to groups.
Right.
And so you just add them and get people to say nice things about you, which will be certainly legit. But I think, honestly, when I hear a good value proposition, especially if it's unique, like I saw Air Canada go down, Air India go down.
Right.
And I was a witness to that. Okay, like, I really don't care about how much experience he has so far, right?
Right.
So I'd be willing to take a chance on him if everything else lines up and his story lines up and so on. So I think the value proposition is the number one thing you need, and the platform is the number two thing you need.
Interesting. Yeah. I'd have to think about I'm sort of thinking for myself, if I was looking into this, I'd have to think of what that value proposition is. it could go a couple ways, but depends on, I think one of the things too that as I'm thinking through this, you really have to be open, as you said, and be willing to sort of share maybe your emotional or sort of deepest, I won't say deepest, darkest secrets, but at least, the things that are going to draw people in. Because as you said, no one wants to hear a superficial kind of, glazed over, kind of rendition of the events. They want to hear your thoughts, your feelings, kind of, you need to be able to bring them, it's the storytelling, you have to bring them to that emotion almost, right, in them, so they can relate to you in that story. So let's actually, I'm going to ask that question. What, if you're now giving advice to somebody, what would be sort of thoughts that you would say to, somebody who's coming into that, they've decided they've got the value proposition. How do you give a good speech, or do you work with people on sort of the foundations, or what kind of?
I don't work on the speech writing. I mean, I can do that, but it doesn't interest me because other people can also do that. So where I work is where they're not good. Other people can't do, right? The kind of advanced knowledge I have is what other people don't have. So if you need someone to work on your speech, you hire someone to work on your speech. But I think
Ghostwriters.
Yeah, sure. But or certainly copy editors. But the thing is that I have seen the best speakers in the world, and so I'm just going to tell a story which I think says everything.
Okay.
I was at a sold out Ontario Club luncheon, right? $100 for lunch, so it was hefty, and every seat was filled. And the speaker got up with a whole sheaf of papers, like a whole bunch of papers, and you thought maybe he dropped one or two on the way to the podium. Well, you don't do that in this world, right? You don't do that. You don't read. And he wouldn't look up. No eye contact, no hand gestures, nothing. And he got to page 3, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to lose it. It's going to be horrible. And then page 4, I felt like I'd been struck by lightning, and he remains the best speaker I have ever heard in my life. The one thing he had that other speakers I've heard at the NSA and CAF's conference and other places, he was so real. He was so authentic. And I wrote him a letter afterwards, and I said, it's as though on page 4, you stopped caring about whether we agreed with you or not, because his topic was controversial. And he just put his heart and soul into it. And he got the most rousing standing ovation afterwards that I've ever heard in my life. And he was Dennis Edney, the lawyer in Calgary or Edmonton, who went to Guantanamo several times on his own dime to visit Omar Khadr, who was a child when he was arrested. And he talked, and Khadr had been so burned by the lawyers he had that he wouldn't speak to Dennis, and Dennis would go over there on his own dime, go down into this dungeon, go walk into hell, basically.
Right.
And Khadr was chained to a cement wall in a windowless room.
Wow.
Yeah, like 23 hours a day or so. So Dennis Edney, who's a real hero of mine, he eventually got the guy out after creating all sorts of lawsuits and so on. And and they lived, and like he took him in as well. So I think that my point is nothing matters more than just being real. He was completely aligned with this message.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's that sort of like, I don't know what the term is. You vocabulary. I have a fairly decent one, but I can't remember words for the life of me. But basically having sort of the fortitude to sort of stick to your sort of your thoughts and then to live that life, right? I don't know what, there's a term I'm thinking of that you kind of aligns the two, where now you're living your truth, I think, or you're kind of, acting
living your truth.
Living your truth. Yeah,
whether others agree with you or not, you're just going to honestly speak your truth. And I think actually in a way it was in his favor that he was so unpolished. It was just refreshing. Like no Toastmastery. Oh, put your hands here,
Right.
then.
There's
There
no
was
like
slick.
all the eye contact stuff you said was fully lacking, but yet the actual message and the way he presented it and the way it was obviously taken in was greater than anyone else that, like you said, was maybe polished from a presentation perspective,
All
right?
slick.
Yeah.
Slick doesn't work. And the truth is, there's no one in that room who will not remember that speech until the day they die. It changes lives, speeches like that. So that's what I would urge anyone who's going to be out there to do, or have something really, really meaningful in their speech
Right.
that will touch people's hearts and also make them see things differently. Our job is to change, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Give them a little bit of maybe some food for thought, something to think about, something to take away with, and maybe put into their own lives, right? Or
How exciting
change
is
their
it?
perspective.
How exciting is it to say, "Oh, I never thought of it that way."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
So I think that's the whole point.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Kathleen, I really appreciate you being here. I'm going to actually change up my entire final question because I've asked the same question of everyone else. It's usually give me one word that you would give to a younger you or a piece of advice. I'm going to ask you a different question though. So you're in a tornado. What is the last thing you want to say to the world? I'm here. I'm going to pass it on. What is the last thing you would like to say to the world?
I'm perfectly safe, thank you, Jason.
No, you're in a tornado. You're in a hurricane. What would you? I'm going to flip the script and turn it back.
You could manufacture it for me.
Yeah. What would you like to say to the world?
I think I come back to what you said: love and encouragement. I think if I had one word on a tombstone, hopefully there aren't going to be many more of those, but if I had one word, it would be encouragement.
Encouragement.
Yeah.
Right. So encouraging others to kind of live their truth, if you will,
to be who they are, just to be who they are. Yeah.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Kathleen, thank you very much for joining me. Appreciate your patience. I know we had a bit of change up there, but thank you very much for joining me. And everyone else, this is Powered by Backers, yet another episode. And we will, I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Kathleen, again, thank you. Enjoy your afternoon. Thank you very much. Cheers.
OMG, baby, tell them.